today I'm very excited to have a conversation with a very known horseman, a world-renowned horseman, Warwick Schiller. And a few years ago, when the pandemic hit, I got aware of Warwick. I was not aware of him before because we met on an app in a chat room. And what struck me most was the way um, how eloquently he talked about so many topics which are absolutely my passions, which are not about horses, but about life itself. So, welcome, Warwick. And I would ask you to present yourself to the people who don't know you, because I think you can do that far better than I can.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm glad to be here. How would I, these days when people say, so what do you do? I'm like, how long have you got? I was a horse trainer I've been training horses professionally for 35 years and spent a lot of time, I was really interested in the reining. The sport of reining. That's what really brought me to America in the first place, because as you can tell, I'm from Australia. And I, um, I really got into kind of like what was the umbrella term natural horsemanship, because I was trying to learn better ways to start young horses to make the
Mhm.
thing less problematic, easier for the horse, easier for me. And so I kind of went down that rabbit hole for quite a long time. And then I'd say probably almost 10 years ago now, my wife bought a new reining horse who we didn't pay a large amount for. We had a modest budget, but
Mm.
his talent far exceeded his budget. But the thing was, you couldn't replicate the talent he had at home in the show ring. He would spook at the judges' chairs and things like that. And
Mhm.
at that point in time, I'd had my YouTube channel had, I don't know, probably 20 something million views on it. And I was traveling around the world doing clinics. And, every horse comes in the clinic and they leave better than they came. So I know what I'm doing. And this horse, the little spooking at the judge's chairs, things like that, that was easy to resolve. But there was like an underlying level of tension in him,
Mm.
like held in tension. Like he wasn't problematic in his behavior, but just had this underlying held in tension that I couldn't train out of him. And up until that point in time, my whole focus was how to shape behaviors,
Mhm.
just training. Um, and I was very empathetic well, I think at the time I thought I was very empathetic in my approaches. It wasn't like I was, doing all the wild and crazy things. But anyway, I couldn't make any headway with this horse. I couldn't change these little things about him that were little,
Mm.
but I couldn't make them any different. So I kind of stepped away from trying to, alter his behavior, and we were going to live with it. But it kind of got me thinking about what else is there.
Mm.
And he, yeah, kind of led me down a bit of a rabbit hole. And I started looking at, the websites of people I wouldn't have looked at before, people who were alternative in the horse world, like fringe dwellers in the horse world that most professional horse trainers would think were crazy people. And then I was still doing a lot of clinics. So I started experimenting with stuff at clinics. And anyway, long story short, these days I'm really into relationship with horses. Um, I wrote a book here a couple of years ago called The Principles of Training. And one of the principles is relationship before horsemanship. So it's not relationship in place of horsemanship. It's not, I just want to pat the horse and feed him carrots. It's about everything I'm doing initially is to build relationship. It's not
Yeah.
trying to shape behavior. It's trying to build relationship, which does shape behaviors, but I'm not directly trying to shape the behaviors. But it's for me, the relationship is about nervous system regulation. It's not about, it's funny when you're in the public space a bit, you can get misrepresented or misunderstood quite easy by people's
Absolutely.
perspectives. And then some things you'll do that just will hit on people's nerves. And lately there's been a number of kind of let's call them vocal, trainers in the social media space who have made a point of trying to ridicule everything I'm doing because they think I'm about, they said relationship shouldn't come first, training should come first, training and leadership should come first. Because they said, all that warm and fuzzy stuff, that's for later. And they think I'm doing the relationship stuff because I want the warm and fuzzies and it's about me. And the point they were trying to make was, that's just for the person. Really, horse wants leadership, all that sort of stuff. And I thought it was really interesting that their perspective was completely a 180 from my perspective on the same subject. And
Mm.
it's, I have, my main business is I have this online video library, and the people who were doing those things have never studied the video library. So they really have no idea what I'm talking about. But it just, I don't know, it triggers them enough to have them have a big rant about it, which is fine by me. I mean, I don't care because, if you think about 10 years ago, I had a perspective on horse training and a perspective on life. And then in a short few years, that changed radically.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think their growth is slowly over, decades. And I had some very slow growth that almost wasn't growth at all. But then I had this huge upsurge. So I can look back not that long ago where my perspective and their perspective were exactly the same.
Mm.
And when I was in that place in my life, I thought I was right. And so if you tried to tell me there was a different way, I would have went, no, because it's working for me. And I'm not saying these people are not good with horses. What they're doing is working for them. And
Yeah.
so they're pretty adamant that I'm crazy or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, welcome to the club.
Oh, it
Yeah.
doesn't, like I said, it doesn't bother me at all because
No.
I feel if you've had a very slow growth and a perspective change over, 3 or 4 decades, you don't realize you've been growing.
Mm.
But
No.
when there is a sudden change,
Yeah.
you can see the difference and you can look back to, 5 years ago, it was, now it's 10 years ago, but 5 years ago, it was 5 short years ago, I viewed the world this way. And that's very recent history sort of thing. And so I could kind of, for me, it took away the judgment of others because
Mm.
I could definitely see their point of view. I was there not long ago. And when
Yeah.
I was there, things were working. Like I said, I do clinics around the world. Horses came in, they left, if not remarkably better, they left
Yeah.
much better. There was very few horses that didn't have dramatic improvements at clinics. So why change what's not broken? And lucky enough, I got a horse who was that didn't work for, and that's kind of changed not only everything I do with horses, but almost everything I do in life.
Yeah. That's the beauty of it. This feeling of people who feel triggered by what you do, actually, if I look, but while listening to you, if I'm thinking like, oh yeah, how has that been for me? For me, my change has not been that drastic. I've been different the whole time. I never fit in anywhere, actually, when in my younger years. And I've always had this slight thing of being ridiculed by people. That what you said, like, oh, just want to caress. It's not relationship without horsemanship. It's like, but relationship first. And the funny thing is as well about horses like clarity. They like it when you are not confusing, when you don't give like mixed signals and all these things. And a lot of people have difficulties in my experience to really make the difference between what is clarity and what is this to me very false idea of dominance. They think like I have to control it and then it's right. And for me, clarity it's like with people, it's the same with people. If I cannot clearly express what I need right now, or if I cannot listen to you while you tell me what you need, how do we want to have a good conversation? It's like it comes down to that. So, yeah,
Oh, I was going to say the other thing about relationship is that good relationships have boundaries,
absolutely.
and and you know, in that relationship, the initial relationship stuff with horses, you've got to be able to have boundaries, but you've got to be able to have boundaries without dominance. And a lot of people
Yeah.
think boundaries and dominance are the same thing, or the only way to get a boundary is through dominance. And there's a lot of different ways to get boundaries. And
Mm.
I know I read a lot of books, and a lot of them almost none of them have anything to do with horses, but quite a few of them have to do with psychology and philosophy and like human relationships. And there's a marriage and family counselor guy that's quite famous that I read quite a few of his books. And he talks about boundaries, and he says, boundaries is not about the other person. Boundaries is about you. So he said, you would never say to somebody, that's bad, you crossed my boundary,
Mm.
because that's putting it onto them. Boundaries is about taking care of yourself.
Yeah,
And so if you're having a conversation with someone and they crossed your boundary, you would say, I really don't appreciate you talking to me like that. Or, I think we're getting a bit heated. Let's take a break and come. I'll meet you back here in an hour. And we can continue this conversation. But you don't tell them they're wrong. You just,
exactly.
you, you model your boundary. And it's the same thing with the horses is, yeah, the boundaries is a big part of relationship. And you're talking about that clarity. You've got to be clear about those boundaries too, but
Mm.
you've got to make sure that you don't enforce boundaries through dominance.
Exactly.
Because a lot of times I think when you do that, you're basically telling them they're wrong.
Yeah. And it's like when you just what you said there, um, if I use a boundary to say you have to stay out, that's not a very, I mean, how do you want to live with each other and share
Yeah.
a space together if you put a boundary like that? But I think as we are, I would say, humans in general nowadays, especially in the Western world, we are not very we don't have really a society which teaches us how to put healthy boundaries, like very often. And I think because people feel so overstepped or they are people pleasing or all these things, they already have the feeling their boundaries were overstepped, that then they have all of a sudden to like kind of put this giant wall which ejects everyone out. And I think that for really being capable with our horses to install a relationship which is really for both of us, the horse and the human, there is one thing which you speak about a lot as well, and so am I. It's about awareness. And the first thing you have to be aware of is not about your horse, it's about you. Because a lot of people nowadays, we read all these things about, and I find it very, very, very important to learn about stress signals, soothing signs, all these things. I find it super important. But if I can observe my horse, but I'm not aware of myself, what state I am in, how I am approaching, what energy do I bring in this conversation, then it's very difficult to create a good relationship and experience for the horse as well.
Right.
So I don't know. Is there a moment, because in what I've heard you talk about, I mean, it's this horse which made you go down a rabbit hole, or several rabbit holes. But is there something where you say, like, you had that experience? Because you said as well, you talk a lot as well about your path, that you said in the past you were not like so, so good at really feeling things, and that you were detached, actually, like dissociated from your
Mhm.
feelings. So is there a moment where you would say, like, oh, at that moment, I really, yeah, experienced the first time how important that is?
Well, I think before I ever experienced that, I had to be aware that I didn't have it. And that horse, he led me down some rabbit holes, and I started doing things differently and doing things differently, reading different things or whatever. And I presented a number of horse expos, around the country in different countries. And a lot of the horse expos here in America, sometimes they will have you'll have several sessions a day. Usually they're with horses, but sometimes there's like a classroom setting where they want you to do a prepared talk. And they always want their titles for these things 6 months ahead of time. And so I just had this generic title that I would give them for one of my talks, which was called Everything I Learned in Life I Learned About Horses. Everything I learned in life that I learned from horses.
Hmm.
So it's not about horse stuff, it's life stuff. And I might do this once every 6 months. And every 6 months it was a bit different. I just would talk about things I'd learned about horses. And so I was not long after this horse, oh, it might have been a year or so after this horse, but I was at a horse expo in Madison, Wisconsin, and I had to do this talk, and it was in like a lecture hall. There was probably a couple of hundred people in there. And I stood up there and I talked about some stuff I don't think I've ever talked about to anybody before. And I admitted it to a room full of a couple of hundred people.
Mhm.
And I went back to my booth after that and I was talking to a lady on the way and she said, "How did your talk go?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, I feel like I've been run over by a truck. I'm exhausted." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I kind of admitted some things to that crowd of strangers I've probably never told anybody before. I may have never even admitted that to myself."
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh, well, Brene Brown says that, vulnerability is the ultimate badassery sort of thing." And I said, "Who?" And she mentioned Brene Brown.
Yeah.
Probably half an hour later, someone came up to the booth and also mentioned Brene Brown. So it was like a name I'd never heard in my entire life. Now I've heard it two times in the last half an hour. So I came home from there and I looked up Brene Brown and, looked up her famous TED talk.
Yeah.
Um, but then I got some of her audiobooks and I was listening to them. And one of them, she said, "You cannot selectively suppress emotions. If you suppress the lower emotions, you also suppress the higher emotions."
Mhm.
And growing up, as a boy in Australia, you're not supposed to show fear. You're not supposed to cry. And, my family, you didn't show grief. Like you go to a funeral and like, "Oh, well, he's dead." Um,
Hmm.
and and right then, and I knew that, you weren't supposed to show those things, but I thought, oh, by not experiencing those things, I'm not experiencing the other side of it either. I said, "Oh, I wonder could I experience more joy and more happiness?" Because for me, joy and happiness had always been up here. I'm
Hmm.
laughing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, but I've never actually had any somatic experiences of that at the time because I didn't know that was a thing. Like at school, they don't have a class called emotions. And they say, "Okay, boys and girls, you should have this energy in your torso that moves and shifts. And sometimes it's very painful and sometimes it feels really good. And if if you don't have that going on and no
Yeah.
one's ever told you it's a thing, you don't even know it's a thing."
No.
And I didn't know it was a thing. And I have to tell you that the first time I ever experienced. So I tell you what, I have felt some emotions. I felt heartbreak and being in love. So I've always been a bit of a romantic because I think I get feedback from that. I've never been very competitive
Mhm.
because winning something didn't give me a feeling.
Yeah.
So I don't care if I win or lose. Like there's no feedback from that. So I felt heartbreak, being in love, and probably fear and dread in the pit of my stomach. I thought those were the only two things that existed, sort of thing. And so I started going to therapy, and for a year there, I went to both individual and group therapy, like
Mm.
both every week. So 2 sessions a week, sort of thing. Didn't do anything for me, but at the end of that year, I was in Australia driving around doing some clinics and I was listening to an audio book by, I think it was Tim Ferriss or Dave Asprey. It was Dave Asprey, sorry. And he was talking about different modalities of different things. Anyway, he's talking about there's a doctor in Silicon Valley who will pull fat out of you, spin off your stem cells and inject your stem cells into your joints, like if you messed up your joints doing sporting things or whatever. But he said there's something else he'll do where he'll spin off your stem cells and inject them into your vagus nerve and give you a complete emotional reset back to your factory settings. And I'm like, you mean I don't have to go to therapy twice a week and listen to a lot of stuff? And we, at the time, lived in the bottom end of Silicon Valley. So when I got back from that trip, I looked the doctor up. I made an appointment to have an on phone consult with him, and we
Mhm.
chatted for quite a while. He asked me lots of questions, and I told him what I wanted. So that procedure is called a stellate ganglion block. Um, anyway, I told him that's what I was after. And he goes, well, based on what you've told me, I don't think that's what you need. I think you need something else. I'm like, okay. But we made an appointment for me to go in there.
Yeah.
We go in there and he hooks me up to an IV of something called NAD. Do you know what NAD is?
Hmm.
He hooked me up to an IV of NAD for 4.5 hours. And
Okay.
then they hooked me up to a dose of ketamine. He gave me a ketamine trip. And that was my first psychedelic experience. I'd never tried psychedelics, had no interest in psychedelics. Um, People that take drugs are bad. And what's supposed to happen, and that was about 4 o'clock one afternoon. And what's supposed to happen is he said, you'll probably go off, your emotions will go offline for about 8 hours and then they'll kick in. Well, I didn't have any to go offline. So, but that was 4 o'clock one afternoon. And the next morning I wake up, 6 o'clock or whatever. And my wife says, how do you feel? I'm like, no different. Well, like that's another bust. And I went to therapy for a year and didn't do anything and did that. That didn't do anything either. Well, that day I was going to fly to a horse expo. So I was in the San Jose airport about 3 o'clock that afternoon. I'm at the gate waiting for the plane. And all of a sudden I got this sensation in my torso and it felt like Sigourney Weaver in Alien. There was this energy inside me. It was like there was an animal underneath my skin scurrying around, like I had rats in the attic sort of thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what in the world is that? And over that weekend, as I interacted with people, you know, it would move and shift and depending on who I was talking to and what they were saying. I'm like, is this what they call emotions? This is weird. What was really interesting at that horse expo is a lot of times when I go to horse expos, we have dogs and when I go to horse expos, there's very few dogs there. So if I do it, someone's got a dog, I've got to go over and say hi sort of thing. But this place, it's in Washington State and in this county, everybody takes their dogs everywhere. So this horse expo, almost every person's leading the dog around. It's just like a cultural thing there. So I was in my booth behind the desk, talking to people, whatever. And this lady was walking around and she had a cat on a harness on a leash. And
Oh,
she
wow.
walked past my booth and that cat ran straight over, jumped up on the table, jumped up in my lap and sucked up against my torso and sat there for 45 minutes. The cat wouldn't move. And I said to the lady, does he do this all the time? She goes, he's never done this before.
Oh,
It's like that cat could feel something. She actually had to pick him up by the scruff of the neck when it was time to go because she couldn't get him off me. And so that was my first experience with any psychedelic. And then probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 months later, someone gave me some psilocybin mushroom capsules, so
hmm.
microdosing mushrooms. And so I microdosed mushrooms for 10 days. I didn't probably notice much, except our cat that we had at the time, who never sits on anybody's lap. I would sit down on the couch at night time and she would jump on my lap and suck up against me. And if I got up to, get a drink of water or something, when I sat back down, she got back on there. The only time she's ever sat in anybody's lap was the 10 days I was microdosing mushrooms. And so obviously she could sense something different.
Pretty
And
cool.
so since then mm, I've had probably 4 or 5 other experiences with psychedelics in a healing sense. Never for fun or anything like that. And they've been, that's over 5 or 6 years, so like one a year, if that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, that was that. You asked me about did this horse make me feel emotions? Not at the time, no, but it's been a slow unraveling, and I think do you know who Ram Dass is?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, back before he was Ram Dass, his name was
Well done.
Jeffrey Alpin, I think was his name. But him and Timothy Leary did a lot of stuff at Stanford University with LSD, and he did lots of LSD. And at the time, he said, and then I realized at some point in time that the whole point of doing LSD was not to keep doing LSD. The whole point of LSD was to show me what's possible, and then I had to figure out how to access those feelings and states without it. And that's when he went to India and got a guru and became Ram Dass. But yeah, so the the plant medicines were a big part of me at least experiencing what those
Yeah.
feelings feel like.
Making it easier, yeah. I've done
Mm.
really quite a lot. I think for now 10 years, I've done quite a lot of Joe Dispenza seminars. I don't know if you
Mm.
ever went there.
I haven't. I want to. Have you been to the 7 day one?
Yeah, I have done
Oh,
several. I've
oh,
like,
really? I've
yeah,
heard
yeah.
that's life changing.
And it absolutely is. And because it's interesting what I'm not like, as I said, I don't come from a horse background and so on. So I have, been born 1980 with fashion, designer, parent and so on. It's like I've seen in my childhood a lot of people abusing drugs, because that was
Mm.
like the 80s. I mean, in the fashion world, there was not one person not taking drugs. And I was, as a child, it was just frightening. So for me, it
Mm.
was always like, it was not that I was indoctrinated like drugs are bad. It was like I saw it's bad.
You saw it.
I don't want to have to do anything with that. So for my life, except alcohol and smoking some weed, I never touched any drug. But when I started, like looking for answers on my path, like to feel better or because you said something about this range of emotions. And I had like, I can relate to this. I couldn't feel joy and so on. But I always could feel like very, very, I would call it a very deep sadness. And make me think when you talked about the not feeling grief, not being allowed to
Mm.
feel grief. I had this thing with sadness like my whole life since I can remember. And it was always feeling like I always had this feeling of I need to go there and feel it, but it was like if I really feel that, I'm gonna die. It was just like
Mm.
nervous. I just internally it was like if I really open that door, I literally am not going to survive. So I each time I tried, I closed it again because I can't. And actually, it's not very, very long ago that because I had a very transformational last year of my life, that I actually opened that door. And it
Mm.
is crazy what happened since then in on the other part of the range, whole range of emotions, because the joy and the love and the connectedness you can feel once you feel that part is just like it's the other side. But the Joe Dispenza clinics were for me really I had experiences there. I witnessed healings of people which before I would have, I mean, I've met a lot of, let's call it woo-woo people in my life. Um, Actually, first I've really been like normal school medicine and so on because of some physical health issues I went through. So it was like that saved my life. So let's just go for that. And then after, like in my early 20s, I was living in France for a while, and when I came back, I was only meeting like energy healers, animal communicators, all these people. And I was like, yeah, sure, another one, I was just like, I was thinking like, this is just woo-woo stuff. Don't let me alone with it. And, but it kept popping up again and again and again. And then I was like, okay, yeah, yeah. After a certain amount of synchronicities, maybe I just need to look at it. So, I got in touch with a lot of those people and it opened up spaces for me, which were really like very a different reality of life. Just that I had difficulties opening it up for me. I could experience stuff with animals, with people, with seeing things and whatever, but Joe Dispenza really, for me, was a stepping stone to get to this connection to me and get into realms where I mean I witnessed healings which were just like for how we are educated, which are impossible, but I saw
Impossible.
them
Yeah.
happening. So I know they are possible. And I've had created chemicals in my brain during these meditations where I've had out of body experiences, which usually you only have under certain substances. And I know a lot of people who experience that. At the same time, it's not everyone who experiences it because you get very, very close to all your limitations, all your
Mm.
blocking belief systems, all your, no, this emotion, I won't let it flow through because I can't stand it. So you are very, very close to actually to figure out where you are at. So this is like my experience with that. So um, I find it interesting that you know, this path which you just described, that's exactly that. I think it shows you a glimpse of something, but I don't think you need it. You know, it is helping you to have that experience, to have something to attach to where you know that's where you want to go. You have like a point of reference kind of
Mm.
in what you say.
Yeah, like I said, it's they've been less than one a year, so I haven't, and I've never done more than one of each. So I've dabbled a little bit with everything. I got a question for you though. So this sadness that you were afraid of,
Mhm.
when you actually went there, was it as bad as you thought it was going to be?
Absolutely not.
Hmm.
It was,
See,
I think that's always the point. The things you're afraid, it's never, once you take the step, it's not as bad as you think. And for me, when I'm someone who cries a lot. When I see, I feel with people when someone is like emotional or touched by something, I just have to look at them, I start crying. And that is something actually where I can now even see the beauty in the sadness. I can feel the love in the sadness, which I was absolutely incapable of even thinking that would be possible before.
um, oh, you said something there that made me. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I remember having a conversation. Would be 2 years ago now because it was. I'm going to a horse expo next week, and it was at that horse expo. I went to dinner with this one girl, and we were like just the two of us at dinner, and we're having this really intense conversation, and we're talking about this sort of stuff. And I said, you know what? As this journey unravels, there's one thing that worries me. What if I go crazy? And she leaned forward over the table and got real close, and she goes, "So what if you do?" I'm like, "Oh, it's not that easy, is it?"
Not what I want to hear.
No, that's not what I want to hear. But it's kind of the same thing. Like you thought, if I go into that sadness with as much sadness as there, it'll kill me.
Yeah,
It'll be overwhelming.
I was just, yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that now a lot of other things which would have felt overwhelming are not feeling overwhelming anymore. So I became so much more resilient with difficult things, you know, that I'm like, wow, but I mean, even if you would have told me before, I wouldn't have believed it. So
Yeah, well, there's a lot of this stuff that you actually have to experience, because no one can tell you about it, really.
no,
You've almost got to, they can make you aware of it. They can plant a seed, but, you have to, for me, like I said, that the next day after that psychedelic experience sitting in the airport, the psychedelic experience is not there anymore. I'm not under the influence of
yeah.
psychedelics and nothing happened. And now there's this furry creature running around inside me.
Yeah, but that's so, I mean, when the energy starts moving, I mean, it's like, when we work with horses, there's everything is energy. I mean, the energy you bring, the energy of your intention, of movement, everything, everything starts with an energy. And I think as horse people, a lot of people are aware of that it is about energy, but at the same time are not aware of their own energy. Because you need to have the same compassion for yourself. You need to have, I mean, it's like you can only experience something, that's what you said, at the depth you experienced it. So how do I want to be compassionate with you if I do not have compassion for me?
Mm, mm.
Kind of,
Yeah, that's where the horses become, there's a lot of equine assisted therapy type
mhm,
stuff these days, but those people sign up for therapy and the therapist decides we're going to use horses to
mm,
facilitate it. Whereas it sounds like that's what you're doing too. But from what I'm doing, a lot of times, like at clinics, people have these transformational experiences, but they didn't sign up for a transformational experience. They didn't sign up for therapy. They wanted help with their horse, and in order to get them to be better with their horse, they have to have to come some realizations about, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, probably uh, the game changer I see with helping people with their horses at clinics, especially under saddle, is giving up control.
Hmm.
And instead of the worst outcome happening, the outcome that they've been struggling to try to achieve just occurs naturally.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had a clinic here last weekend, and there was a lady that had a horse that I don't think she had any complaints about this part of the horse. She has some sort of a gaited horse, and she
Hmm.
trail rides a lot. And anyway, during the clinic, I had her not control the horse whatsoever because the horse was a little bit anxious and she was trying to control that anxiety. And what happened was the horse was completely different than he ever is. And she realized that giving up, her trying to control the situation was actually what was creating the problem. The
Mm.
horse didn't need to be trained to be any different. And he was completely different when she was different. And
Absolutely.
I could really see her processing like, this horse just is relaxed and cruises around, and we didn't have to try to teach. Yeah, it was really interesting. I see it a lot, but that's probably the big one I see at clinics is people letting go of control.
Yeah. And people, it's what you said about they don't sign up for a life transformation. They sign up for whatever. I want to make my flying changes better or whatever stuff they have. And then it's most of the time it's about, I mean, all of the time, I would say in my experience, it's about something else. And it's funny, I have one student, I have her since like, I think 23 years now. And once she came to me and she said, you know what my husband said? My husband said, I have become a friendlier and kinder person since I take lessons with you. And I was like, oh, that's most
Mm,
probably the best compliment I ever got, like a confirmation that what I'm
mm,
doing makes sense. Because it's not about if she rides her horse nicely, it's about
right.
who she is herself with the horse and that person she's going to be with everyone else as well.
Yeah,
And
and I don't think you can make that change with a horse and not have it affect the rest of your life. But
exactly.
you know, it's really interesting when the fallout from just helping people with their horses in the way that we do it. I remember years ago I had an email from a guy and he worked for I think the company's Ingersoll Rand. So they make forklifts and they also make elevators
Hmm.
worldwide. Anyway, so he is one of 5 worldwide managers and they are rated, their performance is rated on different factors. And one of the factors is employee satisfaction, I think it was. And out of the 5 worldwide managers, he's only ever been fourth. He's never been fifth. Actually, he's never been higher than, might have been third, but he's never been. Anyway, so his wife's got the horse and she's been watching my videos and whatever. And so he's been watching over his shoulder and it's been, a year or so or whatever. And then one day this guy emails me and he goes, since watching your horse training videos, I've gone from fourth, where I've never been better than fourth, whereas I'm now first on in this scenario, which is employee satisfaction. So it
Wow.
changed his management style
Mm.
just watching horse training videos. Um, Probably the craziest one I've heard. I used to present at a horse expo in New Zealand every year,
Mhm.
and they have a big main building that has a covered arena, has a covered arena, but then they've got all these outside arenas, and each of the outside arenas has like a sound booth there, and when you go over, you go get mic'd up. And
Mhm.
they're audio technicians. So a lot of times these guys probably work with musicians and things like that. They look like what they call roadies.
Mhm.
And I think they've all probably got a bit of an interesting story. But there's one guy there that I did a number of sessions in his arena that weekend, and this was when I started making the change, and I was no longer just talking horse training.
Yeah.
And so I'd come over and like, hey, how's it going? And I'd set the thing up, and then they listen to your presentation. So Sunday night, I get done at the horse expo, and I must have went back to the hotel. I was scrolling through Facebook, and I got a message on Facebook from someone I didn't know. So I clicked on it and it said, "Hey, it's so and so. He's the sound guy." And he said, "I just have to tell you a story." He said, "I watched your weekend and I have to tell you that I've been in a bad way lately, and my plan was to get through this weekend and then commit suicide tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
And listening to you over the weekend, that's not an option anymore."
Wow. Wow.
So you just never know who you are
No.
affecting, especially in public spaces like that. So yeah, it's oh, it's so interesting that that like this lady's husband said to you, "Oh, my wife is better." It's you hear it a lot, but it still never kind of ceases to amaze you.
It's never that you're like, ah, yeah, I know it. I sent like after my last year, which was very transforming and very painful as well. I sent out a newsletter like 2 months ago or 3 months ago, I don't remember, where I was just saying like, this that I went through a period because my horse, because I function different than you. I don't have a big space. We're in Europe, everything is confined. So I had like my one, really literally, she was my biggest mentor ever. That would be a whole different story. But she died like 2 years ago, like very, very suddenly. She was old and so on, but it was a shock. And then I separated from my partner with whom I thought I would spend my life. So it was like a kind of death of a life as well.
Yeah,
And I had really like oof, a tough time, and it was like it took me down a lot of it pushed me to look at some things in my life and to heal things which I really was not saying, yay, I want to go there. But I did, and I wrote this newsletter like actually when I really get out of like this, you can call it dark night of the soul, however you want to call it, but it was like when I really felt like, yeah, I'm alive again. I'm alive. I'm a different person and all that stuff. If you want to, all my structures broke away. With my horse already, like because I organized my work a lot around her and that I have time for that and so on. So I was like everything was like breaking apart. And I felt like this Phoenix story, like I had to really die and be like down to my ashes to be reborn. And I wrote a newsletter about that, but I was not only putting like the nice, ooh, the Phoenix, we're all happy thing, but this like life sucks sometimes and
yeah.
it's hard and we all go through it and it's painful and let me be vulnerable. And Renee Brown, I was like, let me just tell people because in general in my life, I have always had this tendency I was not like the typical people pleaser, but like I will never be a burden to anyone. So I like, I help everywhere that everyone is fine and everyone's needs are met and so on, but my needs don't matter. That's like basically how I adapt my childhood adaptation patterns. So I was
Have you ever heard of enneagrams?
of who?
Enneagrams.
Yes, but I have heard of it and funnily recently.
You might want to look into it. You sound like a two.
Okay.
There's nine different personality types, and like you go through this book, and it'll have 20 questions. It'll have 20 statements at the start of each chapter,
Yeah.
and the statements might be like, "I don't like other people to think poorly of me," you know,
And then you
or
rate
whatever.
it.
And no, or you just kind of think that's me or not me.
Oh, okay.
But you'll read these types and you go, "Yeah, I answered yes to most of those questions," and then you start reading what this type's like, and it's like it's eerily accurate. But I was given it at a horse expo recently, and I'm not sure if I'm a nine or a two, but that's a very two
You
trait
need to
right there.
send me that I need to see
Yeah,
that
yeah,
written actually.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's easy.
after that newsletter, it is so crazy. That was of all of the newsletters I ever wrote, the newsletter with the most feedback. And it was not that they said like, um, oh, poor you or whatever, but because that was not at all the intention of the newsletter. But it was like people said like, actually how alone they feel, that they are so happy that I dare to say that, because everyone thinks they are the only one. Everyone
Right.
thinks no one suffers like I do. No one understands this. I don't belong. All these things, you know. And it was so, I was like, I cannot tell you with all these answers I got. I was really literally sitting in front of my laptop crying, reading that, because I was so touched by how easy it was actually, once being authentic in my vulnerability, to really touch a lot of people and to give them. And one even one woman was so cute. She wrote, because I wrote like three things, and I don't even remember exactly now. Three things like advice in such a moment, you know, and that you can really trust yourself, that you don't beat yourself up for how you've been, like things which are like common sense. And she said she's going to print it out and put it on her fridge so that she's remembered of it. And I was just thinking, that's so cool, you know, and that's what it is about. And the horses are, I don't know, for me, they are, I really wonder how they got to have this role in people who are so connected to horses, because they touch something in us, which, as if we need that because we're incapable of touching it ourselves.
Ourselves. Yeah. You know, I think I'm a big believer in the energy of intentions.
Mhm.
And if you had have written that exactly the same thing, because you knew all these people were going to get back to you and say, "Man, it's amazing," whatever, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah,
It's that would not be vulnerability. That would be manipulation.
yeah,
And I'm, you know, helping people with their horses. A lot of times, the same action, the same technique with a different intention has a different energy to it and a different response to that thing. And it's like you didn't do that vulnerability thing for an ulterior motive. You know, you didn't do it because you were going to get all this good feedback. You did it to be authentically vulnerable.
yeah,
And yeah, and I yeah, that's something I really believe in is the intention with which you do something. And it's almost like I truly believe this. For me, the secret to the universe is there's a magic in doing things with no thought of getting anything back, doing things for the good of others and helping. Um, I've been very blessed in life, and the place I'm at now, I got here not because I had a plan. There was no business plan. There was no whatever. I had a business. I was a horse trainer. I got up in the morning and rode horses all day. Um, but all the amazing things that have happened to me came because of things I did to help with no thought of getting anything back. So it wasn't trading. It was giving, and I feel like there's probably different magics in the universe, but that's one of the magics. There's a
yeah,
yeah, the universe just interacts with you differently when you operate from
absolutely,
that energy.
absolutely. And it's interesting. I heard someone say lately, I don't remember who it was. It was about passion and purpose. And it was like, if you, I mean, we're passionate about horses, like obviously. Um, but there was something about that, something can stay your passion. You know, you can be a passionate surfer or whatever it is you have passion for, but that stays your passion. But it is your purpose the moment you start giving back to others with it and serving others, for if it is for somehow for the better of their life. And that really like struck me. I was like, huh, because you know, I mean, you are far more experienced and have longer years as well of like being in that horse business, like how you have been in that machinery of the the big thing, you know. Um, and I mean, I'm still, yes, I still like to ride some nice, you know, a nice piaffe on a horse which is ready and in the right state of mind, and I still like that. That's not the point, but it's not at all what I'm really like burning for anymore, you know? I could like, I mean, if it, I love movement. I love the movements of a horse body. So it's like, yeah, just give me a nice rising trot outside and a neck extension. I'm the happiest person on the planet, you know? So it's like, but it doesn't mean that all the other things I don't, if a horse is ready and if it presents itself, you know, I'm still teaching those things, but it's not what's really like driving me, you
Right.
know?
That's not the goal.
No, absolutely not.
Have you ever heard the Japanese term ikigai?
Yes.
Yeah, it's that
Yeah.
Venn diagram where all the things line up and you get in the middle of that. That's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because those I had, you know, this sometimes you have horses which mirror your own behavior. I mean, it's not like, you know, this mirroring thing in the universe and people and so on as well. I don't think it's always exactly one, you know, sometimes someone mirrors you as well with a certain behavior, for example, that you don't have healthy boundaries or stuff like that. But with my horse who died, she really, wow, she was so similar to me. I just could not see it in the beginning. You know, she came to me like already like she was 7 years old, and I think I was the sixth owner or something. So it was like everything went wrong, which could go wrong. And it's as well one of the horses I was most afraid of because she had
Mm.
such like dangerous behavior that it was really like, you know, I was sitting in my car crying if I wanted to decide if today I'm going to try a canter. You know, it was really, I was young. I didn't, compared to nowadays, I didn't know at all what I was doing. And I know that she learned a lot of things and on this, you know, horse training thinking. And I had one moment with her in a round pen one time where I wanted to teach her to lay down. And actually, she learned, I knew how to do that. I knew that was not the point, but she had always been a lead mare. And no matter which constellation you put her outside in the pasture, she was like, and the one who just moves the ears slightly, tilts the neck, and every other horse is like, okay, you know. And she really, really took her job serious as a lead mare. And so when we worked outside and she could see her herd, she would just in between, she was fine, she was not stressed, but she would just like check on them in between, you know, like just look, and that was fine. And I was in the round pen trying to teach her to lay down. So she like, you know, I do my thing. She starts to like scratch on the ground and she's like almost like going down. And she just looked at me like, do you really want that? And I was like, you know, not really aware, asking again. And then after like the third time, she looked at me like, it was really like, I know exactly what you want. I would do it, but I'm a lead mare. I'm not tired. I don't need rest. So I wouldn't lay down. I really want to be able to look at my herd still. So I would lay down for you, but do you really want that? You know, and I was looking at her, and at that moment, I felt so ashamed because
Mm.
I was just, I knew all of that. I didn't have to prove that I know how to lay down a horse. I know how to do that, but do I have to? You know, does the horse have to lay down only because I know how to ask that? If the horse clearly says I would do it, but actually I don't really want to. You know,
Mm.
and that I know that that day I really, oh, I was sitting in my car, I was crying the whole back, whole way back home. Like I felt so ashamed. I felt like, and after that, it's like it started after that day actually, that with all the horses I met, I was like, yeah, okay, even if we can do that, do we have to do that? You know, and that completely like, you know, brought me into moments. That's a question actually I wrote, and one of the questions I wrote down I wanted to ask you. I had moments where I was thinking, can I do this as a profession? Or do I just love horses and do something else, you know, because I was so in this split of what people expected from me, what I had done as well, you know, and then this where I wanted to go, and then all of a sudden, oh, I don't want to answer people's requests if it's not in alignment with me anymore. So, have you have moments where you doubted like doing what you're doing as a profession, or was it just like you were already so clear about it?
I'd say that you know, I've never had a lot of self-confidence. Um, so, when I first came to America, I wanted to learn about training running horse, and I came for a year. And the guy I worked for, I was just going to go home and train my own horses. I wasn't trying to be a professional. I just wanted to
Mhm.
learn how to do stuff. And the day I was leaving, he said, we shook hands on his porch, and he said, if you want to come back, I'll give you a job. He said, you could do this for a living if you wanted to. Well, I'd never thought I could do it for a living. I wasn't like, yes, I'm good. I can do it for a living. Um, and then when I, did do it for a living, there were times when I'm like, am I good enough to do this? So it wasn't like, should I be doing this? That wasn't the question. It was like, can I actually do this? Not should I actually do
Mm,
this sort of thing.
mm.
Um, and then fast forward 25 years to, after we got that horse and I started looking at things differently, we're going to Hawaii for a week and we're flying on plane to Hawaii. And I got this book. I don't know how I ended up with this book. It's called Equus Lost. And it's kind of about questioning everything we do with horses. And I got halfway to Hawaii and I stopped. I got halfway through the book on the way to Hawaii and I stopped reading it. At the time, I thought, if I finish reading this book, I won't ride horses again.
Mm.
Um, and I've talked about it on my podcast, and that was probably 8 years ago. I've talked about it on my podcast since then. I've had people contact me, go, "Hey, you can finish reading the rest of the book because the way you view the world now and what you're doing with the horses, you would be fine." It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
at that time,
yeah,
that book kind of really made me think, I can't finish this book. I kind of like, la 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 la. I don't want to. I don't want
yeah,
to know what the rest of the book says because it might, I'm going to have some cognitive dissonance. Well,
exactly.
my cognitive dissonance might not be strong enough to block it out. I might actually have
Yeah.
to let that in.
Yeah, and once you know it, you cannot unknow it. That's
Right.
sometimes there's things you're like, oh, I wish I would not know that.
Mm.
Because once
But
you've
that,
seen it, you can't unsee it. But most of the time, it's good that you did, I would say.
I'd say so all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, probably all the time. It's just like the discomfort of change, which is so permanent.
Right. Yes.
The only thing actually which is permanent. So, do you have dreams still, like do you have something where you're like, oh yeah, that's something I would like to bring to this world, experience or something?
Um, I don't know if I have. Well, I think I'm living my dream right now. Actually, what I'm living right now wasn't even my dream because I didn't think this was possible.
Mm,
Um, because, like I said, everything that's the place I'm at right now came here because of me doing things for the good of people, not for what it was going to get me. So you can't actually plan. I didn't plan this, and I don't think you can plan this. Um, but what I'm doing these days, so if you think about what I spend my time doing, I put videos on social media. I have a video library. That's my main business. I do clinics. And I also have a podcast, and we have a podcast summit where those podcast guests come and present. And I'd say in everything I'm doing these days, my underlying purpose behind everything I do is I'm trying to bust one of people's long held truths, whether it might be a long held truth about horses, it might be a long held truth about whatever. Because I feel like if you can, if you can, if someone has had all these long held truths all their life and you can bust one of them to where they go, oh my God, I never thought of it that way.
yeah.
And they realize that the only reason they were thinking of it that way is that's the way they were conditioned to think about it. But there's a different way
Mhm.
of looking at it. I feel like if I can do that, then you just step back and let their natural curiosity take over. Because once you see one of those bust, you can't not question the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so that's if I'm doing a demo at a horse expo, I'm doing a horse expo next week. If I'm doing a demo at a horse expo and I'm in the arena working with a horse, I'm trying to help them. I'm trying to help this horse feel better in this situation or whatever. But I also want to I want to do it in such a way that people go, oh, you've just shattered my reality. That's not how I thought. reality worked.
Yeah.
And then you just let them go home and I don't need to see the rest of it. I
No.
don't need to be involved in the rest of it. I just like to do that. And it's interesting hearing from people over the years,
Yeah.
like how far down rabbit holes they've gone just because of busting one long held truth.
Yeah. So you're planting seeds. You're
Yes.
to a certain degree you are. And I think you're
Well,
good at that.
I'll say that the reason is one of your questions in there. Do I know what my purpose is?
I'm not having that question written down, but do you know what your purpose is?
Yes. That was another turning point in my life. So here, I can't remember how many years ago it was, probably 5 or 6 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. My wife was doing a retreat. So she was organizing a retreat with two other ladies here in California. And one of them said, oh, first, before the retreat, we need to go and see Denise. And Robin's like, who's Denise? He goes, oh, she's my astrologer. And so they go off and see Denise, and Denise reads all their individual charts plus the charts for the weekend of the retreat. And then she starts telling the three of them what role each one of them has to play. And Denise doesn't know my
Mhm.
wife from Adam. And my wife was in human resources for 25 years. And it's almost like all the jobs that Denise said Robin needs to do were related to that. And so Robin thought, this is interesting. I'm going to do a solo session with Denise. So she did. And I was away in Australia, I think, doing clinics. And when I got back, she said, I went and saw this astrologer and she records the session. Have a
Mhm.
listen to this. So I listened to the whole thing. I'm like, wow, she knows a lot about you without knowing anything about you. That's fascinating. I want to do a session with her. So I did a session with her. So you got to give her your date of birth, time of place of birth, date of
Mhm.
birth, and your time of birth. So I had to ring mum in Australia to find out when I was born. So I go along to Denise, you see her in person. We're at her kitchen table or dining room table, and she looks at all the charts and she starts going, whoa, ooh, wow, this is interesting. Oh, you don't see this very often. And she's mumbling away there for a while. And then she kind of looks up at me and she says, and so at this point in time, I've made my change in life. My YouTube videos are not just about training horses anymore. I'm talking about all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah.
And there's like 23, 24 million views on my YouTube channel at the time, something like that, 25, something like that. And I'm talking about a lot of things that are not horse related.
Mhm.
Anyway, she says to me, she says, your charts say that from the moment of your birth, your whole purpose here on this planet has to been to gather hundreds of thousands of people and lead them towards consciousness. And I'm like, whoa, that's heavy. I'm just a horse trainer. That's what I was thinking. But by the time I left there, she had me convinced, okay, that's what my purpose is.
Yeah.
But then the voice kicks in, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's can't be you. And
Who
then
do you think you are?
who do you think you are? And my name, there's no another single person on the planet with my combination of first and last name. A lot of
Wow.
people have, you put their name into Google and you can get all sorts of things. There's only one of me. So I thought, she Googled me. She had my first and last name. She's a sham. She's a charlatan. So I don't know if you know this, but the universe gives you a message and you fail to take that message, um, it'll give you a bigger message that you have to listen to. So I'm not much of an urban dweller. Okay. I'm a country boy. I don't do well in urban situations, especially around a lot of people. And so a few months later, I was doing a clinic in another part of the country. And on the Sunday night, I'd been to dinner after the clinic was over and I was going back to the hotel and I had to get up really early in the morning to drive another hour to get to the airport and all that sort of stuff. So I thought I need to fill the rental car up with petrol. And so I'm driving around looking for a petrol station and I find one in this kind of deserted industrial area. And
Mhm.
I pull in there, and there's probably let's say there's probably 10 or 12, let's say, military-aged African American youth is how I would describe them, with some very
Okay.
baggy pants, all loitering around there, and like my spidey senses run high. So pull up, and in America you pay before you pump. I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't know what it is in Germany. Um, so I swipe my card, then I get the gas pump, and I go to open the petrol cap, and the cap won't open. I'm like, oh, I've got to unlock the car. That's right. And I try and with the keys. That's not it. And I'm in the, got the pump in one hand and I'm in the car trying to find, and I'm like, forget it. I don't care what they charge me when I take the rental car back. I'm out of here. So I hang the thing up and I press cancel and I jump in the car. And as I put it in, and I'm driving a small rental car. So there's
Mhm.
nothing about the car that you can tell about me. And I'm probably dressed like I am right now. So there's nothing about me that would give
Mm.
anything away. I start to drive forward and there's a knock on the driver's side window and I turn and there's this black guy right there with he's got his face up against the window and he's got like a big neck tattoo and like a bit of skin off one cheek sort of thing. Looks kind of rough, you know. And I'm like, oh God. And I turned and looked at him. And as I looked at him, he kind of stepped back and put his hands up like this. And he said something along the lines of, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, mister. But he looked what I would term ghetto, but he sounded southern and educated. So from the
Mhm.
southern part of America and educated. He didn't say, he didn't say, hope I didn't scare you or whatever. He said, oh, I'm sorry, sir. I hope I didn't scare you with a southern
Mm.
accent. And so the car is still running, and I wound the window down about an inch, and I'm like, "Can I help you?" And he says, "I'm sorry, sir. I hope I didn't scare you. Can I just tell you my story?" He said, I'm a gospel singer from Alabama, and I've got a degree in religious theology from Southern Baptist University in Montgomery, Alabama, or something." And he says, "I do a lot of volunteer work, and so this is in Michigan, so northern part of America."
Mhm.
He said, I do a lot of volunteer work and I came up here to volunteer to help build a church, but something went wrong and there was some miscommunication and it wasn't even getting built. And I've been sleeping rough for the last 3 nights. And he says, I have some money. I just need 19 more dollars to get a room because I'm so tired. And he said, I know you're probably saying, well, why don't you go to a hostel? But I don't have a Michigan driver's license, so I can't go to a hostel. And by this point in time, I'm like, I can get the dude some money. He sounds legit. So I turn the car off and I roll the window down and I stick my hand out the window and shake hands with him and say, hey, I'm Warwick. And he says, whatever his name was, and I don't know what he said his name
Mhm.
was. I wish I could remember. And as we shake hands and we introduce each other, then he doesn't let go of my hand and he starts to sing. He sings
Oh.
this gospel song and he can sing. And now we're holding hands. We're looking each other in the eye through the window, and it doesn't feel weird. And we're just holding hands, and he's singing this gospel song, and it fills up the whole space of this petrol station. You know, his voice, and he sings this whole gospel song. We're just looking at each other's eyes, holding hands, and then he finishes the gospel song and takes a breath, doesn't let go of my hand, and then he starts to pray. So now he's praying. And the song and the prayer goes for probably 5 to 7 minutes. And we're holding hands, looking each other in the eye the whole time. And then he stops praying and he kind of, I don't know, he looks like he got a message or a download or whatever. He kind of looks at me and he leans forward and he goes, I don't know what you do for a living, mister, but your whole purpose here on this planet is to gather millions of people and lead them towards God.
Wow.
And then he takes his left hand and he points at me and he goes, but the only thing holding you back is your fear. What do
Wow.
you do with that?
What I want to say, like,
What do you do with that?
no voices in your head anymore, I hope. Or you just,
I got the message.
yeah.
I got the message because I was paying attention. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm uncomfortable. This is a scary situation. And,
Wow.
yeah, so now, it's not like I wake up in the morning and go, yes, I'm out to save the world. I'm just doing what I'm doing, and that's the purpose for it. I don't get too wrapped up in the purpose. Like it's not about me. That's the
Yeah.
big thing. It's not about me.
Yeah.
There's obviously a message that's trying to come through me, and I'm just trying to be a good conduit for that
Yeah.
message. And it seems like the universe has set me up in a situation to where I have an audience who listens to what I have to say. So it's kind of like my job to introduce them to messages that are going to either lead them towards consciousness or further towards consciousness. And so
Yeah.
you know, I got a big old tear running down my cheek here. Um, that's yeah, that's what my purpose is. But like I said, I don't get I think if I'd have received those messages before then, I would have thought I was the message. You know what I mean? It would have been about ego. It would have been about
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but by the time I got the message, I was like, yep, that's what I'm doing. So I just need to keep doing it, but I've got to do it without thinking it's got anything to do with me.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, but at the same time, it has everything to do with you as well. That's like, it's both. Not in the ego way, because I mean, it's like, we could discuss like for another 4 hours what the ego really is.
Mm.
But if it's your purpose, that's your purpose.
Yeah. And so when you said, what's my dream? I don't really have a dream,
No.
but I have a purpose.
Yeah, that's
And I,
like,
and I, and I, so I think dreams can be ego related.
yeah.
I don't
I
think
think,
this
yeah,
purpose.
maybe I framed that, not like how but I think I meant what you answered in this
Well, that's, yeah,
story because
that's
I don't have dreams. I've never been like materialist. I don't need like, I mean, I need a car which works, but I don't need a fancy car. I need, it's like, I'm like, that's not at all. But like these moments, like, I would have, when I had Steve, when we talked, he said this thing, his mission is to save as much gray matter as possible during his lifetime, about the rest. And I was like, that's so cool that you can say one sentence, that's my purpose, that's my mission. And actually, I have this feeling as well, call it consciousness, or I really have this feeling as well to reconnect people to their heart. Because we really to go and find yourself, you don't find yourself here.
right.
You need
Yeah,
to,
I think the heart is how consciousness communicates with us anyway. So,
yeah,
yeah, I think it's kind of the same thing. But
yeah,
yeah, so that's why I said before, like everything I do, whatever I'm doing, I like to try to plant a seed to where I can bust someone's long held truth
yeah,
because then they get to start to investigate the nature of reality.
yeah, yeah. I like some years ago, I read the book of Sadhguru, this inner engineering. I don't know if you read it.
I haven't read his book. I know it's Guru is, yeah.
And he put some things with his type of humor. He has some images which I could really say like, oh wow. And I think he was the first one where though I read tons of other books of people who say the same thing most probably, but how he explains in that book how our mind is really a beautiful tool once we know how to use it. And he put it in such simple terms, how he explained it, that I was like, wow, I just have to, because I almost had moments where I thought my mind is my enemy. It's like all things
Yes.
running on these thoughts, these repetitive things which run on their own. Oh, now I'm in that loop again. How can I stop it? I can't, But like how he really said that thing, like you just have to understand it as the beautiful tool it is, but you need to learn how to use that tool.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, yeah. That makes such a difference.
Yeah, he's funny, Sadhguru, because he can say profound things in a very simple way, and he's also kind of this funny. He's not all surishi
Yeah, yeah.
guru type. Like kind of you could crack a joke at any second. So yeah,
Yeah, and you have the feeling like really I don't want to say he doesn't take anything serious, but he doesn't for sure does not take himself very seriously.
right.
And
Yes.
he really what you feel is he is enjoying life. That's like just for him, life it's like a play. It's just but in a very deep, profound sense. That's like so beautiful about it.
Mm.
Wow, Mr. Warwick Schiller. That was a nice conversation with you.
Yeah, it was great.
I really want to thank you for your time, and I want to honor you for the person you have been, the person you are, and the person you are becoming, because I really think that what you are doing is doing a great service to a lot of people and a lot of horses. Um, I feel honored that you were ready and took that time to have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to connecting in future.
Well, thanks for having me, and it was great to chat with you because I feel like you're a very kindred soul. Like we're both kind of on the not just the same path, but like exactly the same path. It's uncanny how similar things are.
Yeah, it's really a great pleasure. And I really want people to, I mean, they find, if you Google Warwick Schiller, you find all you need to find about the horse, by your library and all the knowledge you share. But for me personally, I really want to thank you for this because for me, in the last year since I met you on Clubhouse and then like figured out who's this guy and so on, and I started following you, you really are a good example for me of someone who courageously, actually, yeah, how courageously you made that change in your life is a very, very big inspiration for me.
Thank you. I don't, I personally don't think of it as courageous because what I, I was putting videos out there and making videos or whatever, and I've not been a do one thing on camera and do a different thing off camera type person. So I was
Mhm.
always very honest about what I was doing. It's just when I went in a different direction, I was honest about that. I didn't give any thought
Yeah.
to the fact that what if people don't like this or whatever. It's like, so I wasn't really doing anything different than I had done. I was doing different things with horses than I had done. But as far as what I was putting out there, I was putting out there what I was doing. And when I'm doing something different. To me, it wasn't you know, that particular thing for me. I'm not saying that's not courageous for some people, but for that particular thing for me, what's the old John Wayne saying? Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. I wasn't scared to death because I didn't even think about it. It's like, I used to do this. Now I'm doing this, and I think it works better. That was all it was. And
Mm.
I'm not saying I don't face things in my life that I'm afraid of. So I'm not saying I'm not courageous. I'm just saying that for me, from my perspective, wasn't a terribly courageous thing. Whereas some people that's probably the scariest thing they could ever do. So they would look at it and think it's courageous. And I look at stuff that other
Mm.
people do, and I think that's courageous, and they don't even
Yeah.
think about it. So, I think there's a perspective on that. But for me, and this is not trying to downplay it or whatever. I'm just trying to clarify it. To
Mhm.
me, it wasn't a brave act. It was just how I've
Yeah,
always
most
been.
probably it was encouraging for a lot of people who did not dare to do that. That's maybe
Right. And so, like I said, I look
so
at some people doing things and I think, oh my God, you're so courageous. So it
yeah,
inspires me to be able to do courageous things, even though for them, that's that's not even remotely scary to them. So maybe I inspired some other people to go to the places that they're scared of. But for me, myself, it wasn't a
no, but
it wasn't a mental battle to do it.
that's the perspective. It's like this, the I think we share one of our favorite quotes. I think we share that. I have it on the wall. It's like the Wayne Dyer quote: "If you change the way you look at things, the things you
Mm.
look at change." So that's like, yeah, that's
You
it.
know, sorry to interrupt. Along those lines about that courageous thing. So probably 4, 5 years ago now, I started doing ice baths.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was courageous because every day I'd go, I don't want to get in that thing. Like, yes, you're going to get in that thing. No, I don't want to. Let's make an excuse. No, you're not making an excuse. So I didn't have any of that with that other stuff
Yeah.
you're talking about. But yeah, there are places that happens. So yeah, we all have our different things that you know we're comfortable with and not comfortable with.
Oh, absolutely. So thank you for this time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
See you.
Bye.